Her body belonged only to God, not to her husband, nor her lover, nor even to gossip. She allowed no one to touch her flesh. Yet all of Byzantium, with its armies, priests, emperors, and courtiers, bowed before her. A virgin vested with power, cold as the marble of a cathedral, sharp as a dagger beneath a tunic. This is the story of a woman whose no roared louder than any war. Who is she? Pulcheria? A princess without a husband, but with a crown? Before Byzantium even heard Pulcheria's name, the empire was ruled by a man who did not seek power, possessed no strength, and burned with no ideas. Arcadius, an emperor by chance, weak, sickly, almost invisible. But one day he saw a woman, and in that gaze, like a flash, a story was born, which his daughter would continue years later. It all began not with war, nor with conspiracy, but with attraction, with a desire that proved stronger than politics. Her mother was called Eudoxia. She was not prepared to be an empress. She had no ancient lineage, no strategic dowry, and no secret patrons. She had only the gold of her hair, skin that shone like marble, and a gait that seemed to melt the temple vaults. Arcadius saw her and renounced all the political marriages his advisors offered him. He chose her. Thus, a woman entered the empire who brought not only beauty, but also a new dynasty, the woman from whom Pulcheria was born. He was not the most brilliant ruler, sickly, reserved, not inclined towards martial solutions. Arcadius drifted rather than steered the empire. The son of the great Theodosius I, he inherited the throne too early and too reluctantly. Courtiers and advisors swarmed around him from his youth, each wanting to be not just an advisor, but a shaper of destinies. A wife was chosen for him from the best families, advice was given, intrigues were woven, candidates were assessed for dynastic benefit, but all of this tired the young emperor. He sought not alliance, but a feeling. And one day he saw her. Her name was Eudoxia, the daughter of a military commander, not the most noble by birth, but possessing what neither nobility nor money could give, a dazzling presence. She was young, slender, with thick fair hair and a grace that needed no proof. There was something almost pagan about her, alive, sensual, trembling. There was no ritualistic detachment in her, as was customary for girls raised at court. And Arcadius, accustomed to submission and learned restraint, suddenly felt that before him stood not someone's daughter, but a phenomenon. He insisted on the marriage, against tradition. It was not a political combination, nor a strategic calculation, but genuine passion. On April 27, 395, Eudoxia entered Byzantium as empress. She was not crowned through lengthy negotiations, she was simply chosen. More accurately, he chose her. And this choice was perhaps the only truly independent act of his career. She quickly settled into her position without causing particular objections. She was envied in the palace, but no one openly opposed her. Women whispered, men observed. The empire accepted her as one accepts a storm that cannot be stopped.
The first years of his reign were marked by external tranquility and personal happiness. Eudoxia bore the emperor 4 daughters and 1 son. She fulfilled the main purpose of an empress. She gifted a successor. But she remained more than just a mother. She was a figure. Arcadius adored her, almost obsessively. He often spent time in her chambers, distancing himself from state affairs, trusting more and more those who governed in his name. Eudoxia, according to contemporary accounts, skillfully used his attention, not engaging in direct political conflicts, but forming a circle of confidants around herself. She did not strive for power. She simply lived at its heart. For Arcadius, this love became the only truly warm space in his life. The state, too vast; the church, too demanding; the advisors, too greedy; and she, soft, graceful, radiant, was his refuge. He came to her not as a ruler, but as a man, tired, confused, attached. His adoration became a legend at court. He didn't just admire her, he disappeared into her, dissolved. Too openly, too engrossed for a man bearing the weight of the throne. And it was precisely this infatuation that became a matter of concern for those who looked at Byzantium not through the eyes of a doting husband, but through the eyes of those who saw cracks in the facade. One such observer, the philosopher and bishop Seduce, left words that sounded like a verdict. The emperor, in his opinion, had become a creature akin to a polyp. He who should have heard and seen everything had become deaf and blind, too soft, too in love, too human. In another era, with another way of life, perhaps Arcadius would have been considered a kind husband. But in Byzantium, at the beginning of the 5th century, this was perceived as a weakness bordering on crime. In an environment where strength was demanded of a ruler, he chose solace, and in doing so, he doomed himself to dependence. And yet, as this infatuation continued, Pulcheria grew in its shadow. She watched her mother become the center of imperial life, her father dissolve in admiration, the dynasty being built not on calculations, but on feelings. She remembered everything, down to how love could blind a man and grant a woman unpredictable power. But like any earthly attachment, this love could not last forever. And when the time for reckoning came, it was Pulcheria who first understood. Her mother's happiness became her future lesson. The palace still smelled of saffron and rose oil when the empress found herself pregnant again. It was already her 6th child, and no one was surprised. Arcadius remained a prisoner of her image. He could not and did not want to distance himself. Her room remained the warmest place in his cold, paralyzed power. He came to her not out of duty, but out of inner necessity. There, behind heavy curtains, amidst soft cushions and incense, he felt alive. Others ruled the country at this time, but Arcadius did not interfere. He had Eudoxia, and that seemed to be enough. But Byzantium does not tolerate obsession. Here, for every excess of pleasure, one must pay. Voices of reproach grew louder, and one of the most vehement was that of Seduce, a philosopher, a warrior of the spirit, whom Eudoxia herself considered dangerous. He did not just condemn the emperor, he scourged him with words. He called him a creature who knew neither will nor duty. He said Arcadius was not a man, but a polyp clinging to pleasure. That he had become a threat, not because he was cruel, but because he was weak. But Arcadius did not respond. He continued to come to her every evening, as if on schedule. The labor began at dusk. It was an evening without omens, an ordinary capital day. No one expected disaster. The midwives acted in unison. The servants remained silent. Doctors were admitted only when it became clear something was going wrong. No one later wanted to describe precisely how it happened, but it was on this day that Empress Eudoxia, brilliant, defiant, almost mythical, departed the world of the living. Some said the body could not withstand it, others punishment. Some whispered of a curse, but the fact remained. Arcadius was left without a wife, and the children without a mother. For the emperor, this was more than a loss. It was a devastating catastrophe. Without Eudoxia, he seemed to dissolve in his own grief. He became a ghost, a shadow, a creature capable only of repeating the same actions. His life went in a circle: church, palace, grave. He no longer listened to advisors, issued no decrees, signed nothing himself. He walked through the palace as if searching for her, as if still hoping to find her in the shadows of the columns, in the halftones of the tapestries, in the voice of his daughter. But she was not there. Pulcheria saw all of this. She was about 10 years old. She didn't yet fully understand how power worked, but she already felt the world around her beginning to shift. Her mother was gone, her father nearby, but no longer with her. He had become like a ship without masts. Every day Pulcheria watched as adult men made decisions for her family, as advisors distributed authority without paying attention to the children. She didn't cry, didn't make scenes, didn't ask why. She learned. It was then that what would later become her iron will began to grow within her. She understood. Even if you are an emperor's daughter, you can be easily forgotten, especially if you are silent. In 404, the court froze. There were no lavish ceremonies. Eudoxia's funeral was swift, without excessive pomp. The memory of her began to be suppressed, like a painful tooth removed. Arcadius became even quieter, even less noticeable. 4 years later, he too departed, almost without a trace. And so on the marble of the throne remained the names of children: one boy, several girls, and an entire empire without a master, without a heart, without a plan. An empire where there was no one to have the final word. Officially, the ruler became the young Theodosius, but everyone understood he was too young to comprehend what an empire was. He didn't even know how to sign decrees. The girls were not considered figures at all. Their existence seemed decorative, until, in the depths of this decoration, a will began to stir. And one of them already felt then that her time would come. Not immediately, but certainly. Pulcheria remained silent, as befitted a princess raised at court. But it was precisely this silence that was alarming, because there was no fear in it. A thought was ripening there, and that is far more dangerous than tears. After Arcadius's death, Byzantium experienced no shocks. The empire did not collapse. The streets of Constantinople did not fill with crowds, nor did rebellious sermons erupt in the churches. Everything continued as before, almost indifferently. The throne officially passed to his son, the young Theodosius, a boy with an intellectual gaze and a thin body who was no more than 7 years old at the time. He knew no laws. He didn't know how to construct phrases in official speeches. He didn't even know where the seals were kept. But his head was already adorned with a symbolic diadem. He became emperor, formally, Beside him were his sisters, just as silent, raised in the tradition of invisibility as he was. Girls for whom no one spoke and whom no one asked. The courtiers did not concern themselves with their opinions, nor did they inquire about their thoughts. They were part of the setting. In the meetings of the regents, they spoke on behalf of the emperor, by the will of the sovereign. But none of these regents even tried to teach him to rule. It was advantageous for them to keep the boy a boy. Quiet, convenient, polite. That way, they could buy time, accumulate influence, prolong their presence in power. Anthemius, the prefect of the East, became the key figure of this period. He did not claim the throne, nor did he plot coups. He had enough of the power he already possessed. It was he who headed the Regency Council, a body created to govern on behalf of the underage emperor. The council quickly acquired its own rituals, its own spheres of influence, its own laws. Respected men sat in it, but not one of them saw anything in the children except symbols. The adults in this system felt like absolute masters because, in their opinion, children could not claim seriousness. But children are not simply little adults. They are the future masters of empires, especially if they bear the imperial purple in their veins. Pulcheria observed all of this, quietly, day by day. No one noticed her, and precisely because of this, she could notice everyone. Prefects, generals, senators, each seemed to her an actor in a poorly directed play. They spoke of duty, but acted in the interests of their families. They uttered the names of the emperor and his sisters, but in their hearts they despised the very idea that any of the children might have a voice. Even before Pulcheria took power, a sense of absurdity grew within her. The entire system built around the regency resembled a meticulously laid table without food. All words were formal, all decisions artificial. Behind them stood no ideas, no honor, no true order. And this did not simply irritate her. It provoked an internal protest. Not anger, not resentment, but protest. Quiet, yet inevitable. While the men sat in the halls and exchanged official statements, she focused on her work. She watched over her brother, participated in his education, read books, prayed. She built within herself an understanding of the empire's structure. She did not demand attention, but step by step, more and more people began to realize there was something inconvenient in this young princess. Not feminine softness, not childish pliability, but a tense, concentrated inner strength. She possessed a discipline that the adults lacked. Her silence carried a will. While others grew accustomed to convenient powerlessness, Pulcheria prepared herself. No one knew it. Not even Theodosius suspected how serious her older sister was becoming. But the year was approaching when she would no longer be silent. And then all those who played with the throne as if it were a toy would feel for the first time that it could be sharp. Because one morning the princess would enter the hall where the men gathered. She would lift her head and her voice would sound firm. It was from this that what no one expected would begin. A word followed by power.
In her 15th year, Pulcheria did what no one expected of her. She stepped out of the shadows, without scandal, Without shouting, without theatrics, she simply stood before the council and declared, "I am regent," and that was it. No embellishments, no tricks. No woman before her had spoken like that. No man had uttered it on her behalf. It was a declaration that needed no discussion, as if it were not she who was asking for power, but power itself that recognized her right to exist. The Senate hesitated. The old men frowned, looked at each other, searched for saving caveats, historical precedents, attempts to postpone. But within them, within even the most stubborn and ambitious, a simple and terrifying thought began to grow. If not her, then who? The empire remained without a center. Theodosius was a child, the regency council, a compromise structure, devoid of real authority. But this young woman, still very young, with an inscrutable gaze and a calm speech, inspired not emotion, but reliability. And with each passing day, it became harder to remain silent before her. Pulcheria did not demand adoration. She did not call for struggle. There were no threats in her voice, only a clear, almost mathematical conviction. She spoke of duty, of order, of responsibility to the people and to God. It was the speech not of an ambitious girl, but of a seasoned strategist, and no one understood when the conversation transitioned into an assertion. Somehow, imperceptibly, the phrase, "I will be regent," ceased to be an initiative and became a fact. She was recognized, she was admitted, and from then on, she spoke on behalf of the state. This decision did not become the event of the day. It was not celebrated. It was not adorned with hymns, but it became a turning point. A teenage girl, raised in the gentleness of the imperial court, crossed a line. She took a step into a domain where no woman had trod before her, into a space of power, not adorned, not formal, not granted through marriage, but chosen, seized, by logic, by perseverance, by a silence that accumulated tension. And now this tension had come out. Her appearance on the political arena changed the rules. What had previously been considered impossible became the norm. From then on, Pulcheria attended councils, received reports, approved documents. She managed the emperor's time, his education, his circle of acquaintances. She did not eliminate others. She simply became indispensable. The moment she was recognized, she ceased to be the emperor's sister and became the imperial mind, and in a sense, its conscience. But what happened was only the beginning, because then Pulcheria had to prove that she had not just taken power, she knew how to use it, not through fear, not through a ladder of intrigue, but through daily discipline, constant control, and an image that became clearer with each passing day, the image of a woman capable of ruling better than men. And this image she began to build with cold precision, because from then on, Pulcheria was not just a figure, she was becoming a symbol. And this symbol needed to be strengthened, daily, without giving the world the slightest cause for doubt.
The first weeks after being recognized as regent, Pulcheria dedicated not to triumph, but to the strict architecture of her own reputation. She made it a rule to appear before the courtiers in equally restrained attire, dark purple without unnecessary jewels, only a thin thread of pearls around her neck as a reminder of her status. The day began before dawn, a short prayer in her private chapel, a review of scribes' reports, a list of assignments for the Senate and officials. There was no ostentatious asceticism in this precision. It created a rhythm where each evening concluded with a precise list of accomplished tasks and new objectives. Thus, while others were still discussing the very fact of female regency, Pulcheria was already turning it into practice, quiet, arduous, irrefutable. She quickly established correspondence with the eparchies, introduced the motto, reason, order, and piety at the heading of every important decree, and made secretaries keep minutes in Latin and Greek so that documents could not be distorted in translation. A schedule appeared in the chambers of the young emperor: rhetoric before noon, arithmetic after the meal, reading Plato before the evening service. Doctors, tutors, squires all received instructions in sealed scrolls: deadline, scope, report. The regent did not demand love, she demanded efficiency, and this new, almost mechanical demand stunned the nobles more than any threats. Her connection with the church became not a showcase, but a second nerve center of power. Pulcheria ordered the restoration of neglected almhouses, brought order to grain distribution, and redeemed several hundred prisoners who had long been forgotten by military treasurers. Soon a rumor spread through the streets that the young Augusta fasted more strictly than monks and divided her personal income among the temples of Sophia, Irene, and archangelic shelters. The people accepted her severity not as coldness, but as a guarantee of justice. If she was strict with herself, she would be strict with those who stole from the treasury. When the mints first released coins with Pulcheria's delicate profile, the inscription Salus Re Publicae, for the good of the state, seemed not a parade formula, but a statement of fact. Observing the shifts in mood in the capital, the regent understood the main thing was not only to hold the reins, but also to shape an image to which people could turn in difficult moments. She became something between Maria and Minerva for the citizens, maternal mercy in one gesture, iron logic in the next. Even her promise to remain a virgin she used as a shield against political marriages. No ambitious court could now offer her a favorable alliance without risking an accusation of sacrilege. Thus, Pulcheria freed herself from the most common lever of influence on female rulers, familial dependence. However, time passed. The little Theodosius grew. A male voice already sounded in the palace porticos, and a question arose: who would become his companion? Pulcheria considered this choice not as a court ritual, but as a strategic appointment. She needed a woman who would be an adornment to the throne, but would not become a threat to the order so carefully built. Thus, the search for an empress for the emperor became her personal project, a task that would soon bring a new figure to the palace, full of charm and hidden fire, one who would go down in history under the name Eudokia. From this moment, Pulcheria's discipline would clash with Athenaeus's charisma, and the ideal mechanism of power would first time ring with internal tension.
When Pulcheria began her search for a wife for her brother, she was guided not by her heart, but by her mind. The question of marriage was for her not a matter of feelings, but an act of state design. The empire needed a new figure, young, eloquent, loyal, not too noble so as not to acquire her own family's ambitions, but refined enough to adorn the throne. The search lasted a long time. Pulcheria reviewed genealogies, listened to ambassadorial reports, observed the demeanor of potential candidates at court. Her choice fell not on a princess, not on a senator's daughter, but on a girl from a philosophical family, and her name was Athenaeus. Athenaeus was born in Athens, into the house of the renowned rhetorician Leontius. Surrounded by books from childhood, she wrote poetry, knew Homer by heart, understood Plato, and behaved as if she were conversing with gods, not out of piety, but from an abundance of intellect. She was worldly, lively, incredibly expressive. She combined two qualities that Pulcheria had not encountered in court women: a pursuit of meaning and ease of communication. Athenaeus did not belittle herself, nor did she heap thanks, but neither did she flaunt pride. She was balanced, sincere, and strikingly persuasive. In her presence, even complex things seemed accessible, even political topics appropriate. Pulcheria was captivated. She saw in Athenaeus not just an adornment for the court, but a conversationalist, almost an intellectual equal. Perhaps for the first time in many years, a woman appeared beside her who evoked neither irritation nor apprehension, only interest. They talked a lot about ancient literature, about the nature of justice, about the origins of faith. Athenaeus was still a pagan, but she showed genuine interest in Christianity, asked serious questions, and viewed the Bible not as dogma, but as a text. It was Pulcheria, according to tradition, who blessed her conversion to the new faith. After baptism, she received the name Eudocia, the very name that would later sound like a thundercloud within the palace walls. The wedding took place in June 421. Eudocia became empress and a year later gave birth to a daughter. Everything unfolded as planned. The people accepted her with curiosity, the church with caution, Pulcheria with satisfaction. The empire received the necessary balance: the male figure of the emperor, the soft strength of his consort, and the cold wisdom of the regent. But balance, as is known, exists only as long as someone doesn't start pulling the blanket. Eudocia was changing. With each passing day, she became more confident, freer, louder. Where before a respectful whisper was heard, now irony broke through. Where there was gratitude, sarcasm. And in this, there was something dangerous. Pulcheria did not notice the changes immediately, but a day came when she understood. Eudocia no longer asked, she asserted. She didn't just express an opinion, she dictated. Rumors at court circulated with caution, but with growing tension. It was said that the empress believed a female ruler observing a vow of celibacy had no place next to a young emperor, that it was time to yield, that her sister was the past. One day, a phrase reached Pulcheria: "She has done her part, let her leave with dignity." And there was no enmity in this phrase, only a reassessment. The empress, as if casually, suggested setting aside former power, like a worn-out regulation.
For Pulcheria, this was a personal shock. Her power, built on refusal, on self-discipline, on sacrifice, suddenly seemed questionable. Her role, temporary, and she herself, a hindrance. And in this reassessment lay a threat. Because Eudocia spoke not publicly, she spoke to Theodosius, and he, too soft, too enamored, began to listen. Thus, for the first time in her life, Pulcheria found herself in a position where her standing at court became uncertain. She did not lose her title, but she lost her center of gravity. From that moment on, the chill between the two women became imperceptible, yet palpable. And it was not about personal jealousy, not about competition for attention, but about a clash of worlds. Pulcheria's world, built on asceticism, logic, eternal service. Eudocia's world, vibrant, beautiful, free, sensual. One of them had to yield, but neither of them intended to do so voluntarily. And therefore, Byzantium was to witness not an open conflict, no, that would be too crude, but a long, sophisticated game. A game without weapons, but with coldness in the voice. A game where words became blows, and the first of them had already been uttered. Now it remained to await the response. On paper, they were equals. Both held the title of Augusta. Both participated in the empire's governance. Both had direct access to the emperor. But in reality, there was no equality. There could not be. Pulcheria and Eudocia were too different to coexist in the same political space. Their images, their pace, their breathing were in discord. They spoke the same language, but uttered opposite things. For one, power was a mission, self-sacrifice, a path. For the other, a stage on which to shine, to declare oneself, to be heard. And every second meeting of these two women became a confrontation. Without shouting, without scandal, but with such a concentration of tension that the air in the marble halls seemed viscous. Eudocia felt confident. The people loved her for her beauty, her generosity, her ability to speak brightly and passionately. She composed poems, patronized philosophers, held discussions with scholars, and debated the nature of Christian truth herself. She was adored at court. Her husband worshipped her. Pulcheria, however, remained in the shadows, amidst papers, dispatches, economic reports, and church decrees. But her shadow was not absence, it was structure. She kept the palace in balance. Her absence from public space only made her figure more substantial, and her silence more convincing than any speech. This is why when Eudocia allowed herself to utter that very phrase, that the emperor's sister should retire, it was not just a hint, it was a blow. The vow of virginity, which Pulcheria had publicly made for the sake of God and the empire, was suddenly used against her. Now it sounded like a pretext for resignation, as if her choice was no longer worthy of respect, but had become a formal reason to push her out of power. Not to deprive her of her title, no, but to push her out morally, to make her irrelevant. And in this lay the most subtle form of violence, to remove without touching.
Pulcheria's reaction was restrained, as always. She didn't make scenes, didn't gather supporters, didn't write appeals, but she became truly silent, like the invulnerable. When the nuns in her personal chapel learned of what had happened, they noticed she became stricter in her routine, more devout in prayer, colder with the courtiers. Pulcheria did not complain, but she did not forgive. And most importantly, she did not reconcile. She understood the moment had come when she would be pushed aside, when Theodosius, still guided by her, would begin to lean towards his wife. He was too gentle, too attached to warmth, to affection, to flattery. And Eudocia knew how to speak just like that, softly, tenderly, persuasively. There was such confidence in her feminine strength that he almost didn't notice how he gave her everything, his attention, his decisions, his influence. Pulcheria, however, did not fight for attention. She fought for essence, for structure, for the empire not to turn into a gathering of infatuated faces. She was not irritated by Eudocia as a woman, but by Eudocia as a threat to rationality. She did not believe in beautiful politics, and even less did she believe in politics where sensuality and rhetoric stood behind you. Therefore, when it became clear that her position at court had weakened, she did what no one expected of her. She herself left Constantinople. This was not an escape. It was a step back, taken with stubborn calmness. In letters sent to her closest associates, she did not complain, did not accuse. She wrote about the need for silence, prayer, renewal. But everyone understood this was a strategic pause. She had not left forever. She was waiting. Because Pulcheria was not a woman of a single act, her logic lay not in victory, but in control. And control begins with the ability to retreat when necessary. Eudocia remained in the capital. She celebrated victory, albeit a silent one. She felt freedom, but true power is never obvious. It hides, measures distances, listens through walls. And while the palace celebrated a new era, Pulcheria already knew this celebration would not last long, because politics is not a stage, but a chessboard. And now Eudocia was the one who moved first. Byzantium knew how to create legends where even fruits became weapons. Once, a poor man approached the emperor, ordinary, tormented, with a handful of dust on his tunic and a large gleaming apple in his hands. An unusual, almost unnatural apple, golden, smooth, with the aroma of a summer that had been absent from Constantinople for many weeks. Such a gift could not be ignored. Theodosius ordered a generous reward for the old man, 150 nomismata, a sum equal to the annual income of a good official. And the apple itself, as a token of his love, he sent to Eudocia. The story could have ended there, as a touching gesture from a husband, but Eudocia, for reasons unknown, passed the same fruit to Master Paulinus, an old friend of the emperor, temporarily dismissed due to illness. Paulinus, according to accounts, was touched. Such a sign of attention from the empress seemed almost a consolation. He, in turn, out of respect, or perhaps carelessness, sent the apple back to Theodosius as a humble gift. And when the fruit, having already passed through 3 hands, returned to its first recipient, what happened was that which none of them had foreseen. Theodosius recognized it.
He recognized it by the slightest details, the curved stem, the tiny dent at the base, the hue of the skin. And he understood his gift to his wife had returned to him through the bedding of another man's home. Wounded and irritated, he summoned Eudocia. The response has not been preserved, only the outcome. Paulinus was executed, Eudocia exiled, not to a monastery, not to a dungeon, but to Jerusalem, to voluntary exile under church protection, far from court, from power, from prying eyes. Of course, later chroniclers would argue. Some would say Pulcheria orchestrated everything from beginning to end. Others would insist Paulinus became a victim of chance, Eudocia of misunderstanding, and the apple was even different. But in Byzantine politics, facts are not important. Interpretations are. And one of them firmly took root. It was Pulcheria who reclaimed the throne, not with a dagger, not with intrigue, not with conspiracy, with a symbol, with a fruit, with a legend that spread through the city faster than official orders. While the palace changed tapestries, removed the empress's personal belongings, extinguished her coat of arms, Pulcheria was returning to Constantinople. Calmly, without triumphant marches, she entered it not as an outcast, but as expected. Her return was perceived not as a sensation, but as a restoration of the natural order. Her invitation to the council as a deliverance from chaos. She was no longer a girl who demanded power,
Now she was a woman who had proven that only her cold hand could hold the helm. Theodosius, subdued, accepted her without argument. He did not rush to her with apologies, but neither did he obstruct. His guilt for his own softness, his confusion after the apple scandal, all of it made him vulnerable. And Pulcheria did not seek revenge. She simply took back what she had always considered hers: the council, the court, control over expenses, protocols, and, most importantly, influence over destinies. Her return was not accompanied by triumph. It was not a victory, but a restoration of order. Because now, after Eudocia's fall, there were no more illusions. Only one woman could stand beside the throne. But time passed, and even the strongest systems age. Theodosius himself, a man eternally wavering between the women of his life, was no longer young. His body was failing, his mind became slower, and one summer day, in 450, he fell from his horse and soon after departed. Not to war, not on a pilgrimage, but to another world. The empire was once again without a ruler, but this time without any contenders, without brothers or husbands, without strong figures. And then history did what it had been postponing for decades. It called Pulcheria to power, not as regent, not as sister, but as empress. In her own name, by her own hand, by her own law. She was 51, an age when Byzantine women, even the most noble, either disappeared behind monastery walls or dissolved into the shadows of their sons and nephews. But Pulcheria entered the palace again, not as a shadow, not as a widow, not as a former Augusta. She entered as absolute power. The empire left without a man on the throne, officially recognized for the first time. It was now governed by a woman, not a regent, not a consort, not the emperor's mother, but a self-ruler, by her own signature, her own voice, her own destiny.
It was a moment of historical break, but not scandal. No one shouted, no one protested. The people of Constantinople knew this woman had long been ruling that way. It was just that now there was no need to pretend. The Senate confirmed her title. The army swore allegiance. Churches offered prayers. For the first time since the fall of Rome, a woman occupied the throne of the Eastern Empire as a legal, recognized, indisputable sovereign. But Pulcheria knew the form of power is not everything. To rule, one must not simply be strong. One needs support. Male, formal, political, symbolic. And so she took a step no one expected of her. She agreed to marriage, not out of love, not out of a desire to share chambers, but as a cold, precise, necessary step. Her choice fell on Marcian, a soldier, a man without noble lineage, without past court intrigue. He was the son of a shepherd, grew up in simplicity, made a career with his sword and discipline. There was no brilliance about him, but there was reliability. Pulcheria announced the terms of the marriage herself. No physical relations, no claims on her body. The vow given to God remains in force. It would be a union of will, not of flesh. And Marcian, to the court's astonishment, agreed. Perhaps he was genuinely shocked. Perhaps he simply understood that the chance to become emperor does not come twice. In any case, the union was concluded. Marcian became ruler in name, but it was clear to everyone, the essence remained with her. Pulcheria disappointed neither the faithful nor the skeptics. In the 3 years of her reign, she managed to accomplish more than a whole series of predecessors. She rebuilt 3 churches, carried out reforms in ecclesiastical and civil spheres, approved new measures of aid for the poor and pilgrims.
The money she had saved for decades went not to palace pleasures, but to construction, distributions, and restoring order in the border provinces. She became for the Eastern Roman Empire what Augusta was for ancient Rome, a transitional figure, a woman who managed not only to survive the labyrinths of power, but also to tame the system itself. She did not strive for immortality, but it came to her nonetheless. She was respected even by those who silently disagreed with her. Her decisions were recognized in circles where women had previously been denied the right to an opinion. And when she departed in 453, without fanfare, without a fall, without a deathbed drama, the capital fell into true silence, not from fear, from respect. That is how those who become part of the very structure of the world depart. Marcian continued to rule for another 4 years, but his reign was already an epilogue. He did not destroy her legacy, but neither did he manage to replicate its greatness. And in Jerusalem, in the shadow of holy sites, lived Eudocia, the very one who had once overshadowed the emperor's sister. She, by a twist of fate, outlived her husband, and Pulcheria, and all who had ever shared power with her. But her shadow remained not in the chronicles. Pulcheria remained. The Virgin, the Empress, the builder of churches, and the last of the great women who ruled without crossing the line of fidelity to themselves. And later, her name was entered into the church calendar. Saint Pulcheria was prayed to as the protector of order, because even after death, she remained the one who knew that power is not a matter of blood, it is a matter of choice, and no man would have made it better.